Hello, all. Welcome to week 12. Last week, in our day 1 Exodus reading, we saw the birth of Moses and how his mother hid him in the rushes and the riverside. And we saw how Pharaoh's daughter found him and adopted him. This week, we'll see him all grown up. Let's see what he does. We start in verse 11 of chapter 2. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw two Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" He answered, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien residing in a foreign land." After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Now, the first thing that I want to point out here is from the end of the passage, because we have to understand this as the continuation of the one little bit of reading that we did from the life of Abraham a few weeks ago, when God made that covenant with Abraham and told him that his people, his descendants, were going to be slaves for 400 years of a people that were not their own, in a land that was not their own, and that after 400 years he would remember them and bring them out again. God is about to start fulfilling that promise. And that's a long time. That took not just the 400 years that they were in Egypt, but all the time between when they went to Egypt and when God had made the promise to Abraham, which was at least probably, I think, 100 years before. Because let's see, Abraham was 80-some, 90-some years old when God made that promise. Isaac was born 10 years later. And then Isaac's sons weren't born until he was in his 50s, so that's 60 years later. Jacob then was one of his sons. Jacob's sons weren't all grown for another 30 years later, so that's 80 years. So 80 years, 90 years after God made Abraham that promise is when Abraham's descendants went down to Egypt, and then 400 years later that promise begins to be fulfilled. So it took a long time, but God was faithful to his promise, and he told Abraham from the beginning, he said, this is going to be a long time, but I will be faithful. And it's not even that Abraham was necessarily going to be sitting there watching and saying, "Come on, God, you made me a promise, what gives?" But God tells him in advance. So God is faithful, I think, is the first point. Second, we have to look at this Moses person that God is going to use to deliver his people. Because so far, Moses isn't all that impressive. What does he have to show for his life? He was rescued by the Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, that's interesting. He survived the killing of all the Hebrew firstborn children. So that's something. But he didn't have anything to do with either of those. The first thing we see Moses do of his own free will is kill a man. So now we've got murderer to add on to this. And yes, the man he killed was doing evil, but that doesn't change the fact that Moses looked around, thought he could get away with it, and killed him. So we've got really quite the prize winner here. And then when he realized that the thing was known, did he face justice, own up to what he had done? He ran away. So far, not a lot that speaks well of him. The first thing we see that speaks well of Moses is what he does when he gets to that well. He defends the weak. He doesn't kill anybody, but he does work to, so he takes care of these 7 sisters, and then he waters their flocks. But now he's in exile. Now he's nobody. And we might even take an example from this. It's actually very hard to do the right thing when we are comfortable and living a life of leisure or of privilege. But when we're all by ourselves, struggling just to do what is necessary, just to survive, I'm not saying it's easier to do the right thing, but we can kind of see the choice between what is right and what is wrong more clearly. And we start to see Moses, instead of just looking around and seeing what he can get away with, he starts to do the right thing. And then we see what happens next week. So, God bless you all. I will see you on Wednesday.